So let's start with a really kind of salient question here. Why do we use supersets in our programming? Why do you guys use supersets? And a rhetorical question, because I think there's a lot of reasons and a lot of rationales behind it. But what I want to focus on here are a handful of different strategies that you guys can use. Some of them you'll be familiar with, and some of them may be a little bit more unfamiliar, but things that you want to try when you get in the gym. So when it comes to supersets, and you ask somebody, well, why do you use supersets in your program? You're going to get a lot of answers. Sometimes you'll get, I want to build more muscle. I want to shed more body fat. I want to improve movement quality. I think that's a really big buzzword these days. I want to increase strength, force, or power output, right? We want to see some performance benefits. But let's be real here. A lot of times it's flat out, we got to save time. And I don't care if you're in a Division I setting, if you're in a professional setting, or you're in a private setting. A lot of times it's all about saving time and condensing things to get more work done in a shorter period of time. You have to be good about managing your time during your training sessions. So what I want to focus on are 7 ways that you can use supersets. And the way my brain works is I like to think there's kind of a general way to do it and then a little bit sexier way to do it. So we've got our basic physiology techniques, and we have what I would describe as our sexier, our more neurological based superset strategies. So these are probably going to be familiar for you, and we're going to blow through them. We're not going to spend a ton of time on them, but we've got our upper lower splits. We've got our targeted muscle supersets. We've got our opposing muscle supersets. But then where things get fun, we can use tools like inhibition to facilitation. So we're shutting something off to turn something back on. We can use patterning supersets to clean up our movement patterns. We got potentiation supersets where we may use a heavy strength exercise paired with a plyometric or explosive exercise. And then we've got what I call layering techniques. And while this may not be a pure superset in the clearest sense of the word, I still think it's a tool and a strategy that you're going to want to try out. So here's how I'm going to break each one of these strategies down. We're going to start with the theory, or the why, because I think it's very important that we understand why we're doing stuff. It's something that I ask every group of interns when they start writing programs for us. I tell them, look, you need to have a rationale for everything that's in your program. So I want you to understand why we might choose some of these strategies. Second, I'm going to give you some examples. And sometimes, look, the examples aren't meant to be perfect, but they're there to illustrate a point. And then last but not least, I'm going to give you some application and some notes because look, some of these strategies are awesome, but I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. So what I'm going to try and do is help you understand some of the mistakes that I made so that you guys can fast track your own results and you don't have to make those same mistakes. So let's dive in and let's jump through these. So the first one that we're going to talk about, or the first superset structure, is an upper-lower alternating superset. Now, chances are, if you've done this more than a year or two, you've probably written some sort of program like this. But the question becomes, why do we do it? Why do we use an upper-lower alternating superset? And the thing that's interesting is when you ask people why they do this, a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, I do this because it minimizes fatigue. And I'd have to pause for a moment and respectfully disagree, because what happens is, let's say you're doing a squat and a push-up. When you're alternating between those two, what actually happens is central fatigue goes up, right? Like your heart, your lungs, they never get a break. So you're working really hard the whole time. So your heart, your lungs, your cardiorespiratory system is working incredibly hard. But what it does do is it minimizes that local or peripheral fatigue. So imagine you're doing a set of 10 squats, right? Decent weight, you're working hard. You do that set of 10, you're huffing pretty good. Well, now let's say you take 60 seconds rest and then you do it again, and 60 seconds rest and you do it again. You can imagine how your legs feel if you're doing 3 sets of 10 in about 5 to 6 minutes. Now, let's flip that and let's imagine you're doing a set of squats, minute break. Now you're doing a set of push-ups, minute break, set of squats. So you've got a longer period of time in between those sets of squats. So what it does, it minimizes that local fatigue in a specific muscle group, but it's going to increase the central fatigue overall. So let's look at a couple upper-lower examples and different ways that you guys can set this up. And again, I'm just trying to give you very general examples that you can use. You could do something like a squat and a push-up, right? Again, lower, upper. You could do a split squat in a row, Basically, you can do anything with your lower body and anything with your upper body, and it's going to work and it's going to fit into this structure. Now, with that being said, I've made some mistakes doing this, right? First and foremost, if you're going to do this type of workout, generally it's set up for a more fat loss or conditioning based workout. You're generally working a little bit faster. So if that's the case, and if you're prescribing this for fat loss purposes, make sure you're monitoring the pace of the workout. Too often, a 1 minute rest turns into 2 to 3 minutes, and now you're losing that metabolic effect. So you got to make sure if you're asking for a minute rest period in between sets, that they're working and keeping up that pace. Second, this is something that I had to learn the hard way. You got to watch the lower back. And we all have athletes, we all have clients that struggle with lower back issues. So if that's the case, what you need to be doing, don't pair like a deadlift and a hinge together and then pair it with a bent over row, because now that lower back is being asked to hold a set position for a very extended period of time. And that's when somebody may get into some issues or have some struggles. So watch out for the lower back. A third thing to watch out for is grip. And this is again where a lot of people like to talk about doing like back workouts. If you went to the old muscle and fitness workouts and they're doing deadlifts and rows and chins and all these back exercises, it's great, but if you do it in a superset fashion where you're doing something like a hinge where you have to grip on and hold, and then you do something like a row and a chin immediately after it, by the time you get to that third set or that third superset, a lot of times the grip is toast. Okay, so these are things that you need to watch out for. So you got your standard upper lower alternating supersets. You also have your targeted muscle supersets. And here I've got compound to isolation, but you can flip that too. You can go isolated to compound as well. So why do we use these types of supersets? And look, there are people that are far smarter than me that understand hypertrophy way better than me. But just as a general rule, you're using targeted muscle supersets to increase time under tension or mechanical load, or you're doing it for a very specific muscle group, right? You're like trying to hypertrophy or fatigue a specific muscle group. So let me give you a couple examples here, and this will probably make a little bit more sense. You know, if we want to be kind of a little bit bro-ish, you know, we could do like a bench press, right? Something heavy and compound and then superset it with a fly. We can do a closed grip bench press and then we can do a tricep extension. We can do a squat and a leg extension. But in general, the way you set this up, you do a big compound lift, take a little bit of a break, and then you superset it with an isolative exercise. Now here's what's cool. We're all in quarantine right now, right? If you're watching this, you're probably locked up somewhere. You probably don't have access to all of the equipment that you normally would. So what if you took this whole superset structure and you just flipped it, right? So maybe you can't bench press, but you can do push-ups. Well, you could probably crush a ton of push-ups if you did them first. So what if you flipped this and you did your flies first and then you did a push-up? Or what if you did a bunch of tricep extensions first and then you did like a closed grip push-up? So this is just a different way that you can apply this same strategy based on the tools that you have in front of you. Now, a couple notes here. Generally, if you're going to set up a program like this, it's going to be used in a split routine. So it's rare you're going to do a bunch of isolative stuff in a total body routine. So what you generally do, if you're doing an upper lower split, you could use it there. If you're doing a true like bodybuilding body part split, you could use it there as well. But the great thing about this is too, you can place this really anywhere in the workout. You can use it as a main and lead off with it. You can also do it as like a burnout at the end of your session. So there's lots of ways that you can set this up, because we've all done this, right? At some point in time, I think most of us have gone through like a closet bodybuilding phase, whether you want to agree to it or admit it or not. I know I did. So if that's you, look, you can use isolation and isolation at the end, you know, your old school 3-way tricep series. If you're just trying to fill out the shirt a little bit, you can do flies from different positions. So tons of ways you can set this up as well. And there's not a lot of wrong ways to do it. The big thing here is you just got to watch the loading on the first exercise, because a lot of times you may crush that first set, right? And then you do that isolative exercise and then you do that main a second time and you're like, ooh, man, the magnets are coming on. And by the third time you do that, you're getting crushed. What was a set of 10 and your first set is now like a set of 3 or 4. So always watch the loading on the first exercise, maybe gear it down a little bit or underplay it just a little bit to make sure you're getting the most out of the workout. Superset structure number 3 is our opposing muscle groups. And again, why do we use this? Well, number one, again, if we do like bench press, rest, we get a lot of fatigue in one muscle group. So if you don't want to, just crush one muscle group and you want to avoid that, you can pair a front to back muscle group. So like a chest and a back or something like that. And again, people way smarter than me understand the pump and hypertrophy and how that all works together. But, a lot of bodybuilders swear by it. And there's a lot of really big dudes out there that subscribe to this type of methodology. So again, some basic rationales to why you might use it. When we talk about our opposing muscle groups, what can we do? All right, we could do our presses and our pulls. So our bench press and our chest supported row. We could do, and again, this is where I'm doing it for illustrative purposes. I'm not saying you should go out and crush leg extensions and leg curls, but it's another way you could do it. Or our old school triceps and biceps. I got my guy, Zach Irvin here. I mean, look, your athletes love crushing arms. So we threw this up on the gram one day because he was feeling pretty good about himself. So, hey, if you guys want to throw this stuff in the workout from time to time, I'm throwing arm farm in pretty much every Friday with my athletes because, look good, feel good, play good. Joe Kin said that, I don't know how long ago, but it's something that's always stuck out in my head. So a couple pieces of notes. This stuff can be done with compound or isolative exercises. So it doesn't just have to be big stuff. It can be little stuff like your arm work at the end of a session. Here's the cool thing though. It could be used to restore movement, or it could be used, or it could potentially hold back your movement throughout, right? So if you're doing, say, a push-up and then a row, you're getting that nice, clean, full range of motion. But if you're not using a full range of motion, or if you're doing it in kind of like a herky-jerky kind of way, you could actually be hampering your movement as well. So this is something I'm always thinking about with athletes. Very rarely do I want to take away or restrict motion. So you got to make sure that they're doing it correctly, that they're working through a full range of motion, because while we may train bodybuilders, right, or people that want to build solely muscle, if you're training athletes, you got to make sure that they're doing this in the most effective manner to make sure that they don't lose mobility. But the biggest benefit here, if you're going to do this kind of setup, is saving time, right? If you're going to do chest and back or arms, biceps, triceps, you're saving time because ultimately you need to get in and out of the gym a little bit faster. So with those more basic setups and structures being out there, now I want to get to what I would call like our sexier variations. And these are the ones that I think for you coaches that are looking to really tweak and take your programs to the next level, these are some of the tools that we've used for extended periods of time with our clients and with our athletes to really make sure that they're not only moving better, but that we're also improving their performance as well. So this first one is very simply an inhibition to a facilitation exercise. So why would we use a superset like this? And I'll give you examples here in a minute. But the way I think about this is an inhibition to facilitation superset is there to improve movement quality and or to cement a more optimal position at a specific joint. So let's give you, for instance, how many of our athletes have this wicked anterior pelvic tilt? And I'm not here to vilify an anterior pelvic tilt, but it could cause problems, right? Maybe it's causing an hip impingement. Maybe it's causing lower back pain. Maybe it's causing them to pull their hamstring time and time and time again. Well, this is a situation where I might want to use this type of superset to try and level their pelvis a little bit more and get them moving a little bit more effectively. So let me give you a couple examples here. The most obvious example, and the one that you've probably all used at some point in time, bang out a hip flexor stretch and then do a glute bridge. So if you think about your pelvis, you're trying to shut off or inhibit the muscles on the front side that are pulling the pelvis forward. And then you're going to use a glute bridge to try and pull the pelvis backward or to help try and get that hip extension back. All right, so that one's really simple. And I think everybody's tried that at some point in time. Now, we can make it cooler, right? Nobody said that you have to do hip flexor stretches and glute bridges. You could do a half kneeling exercise, right? So something like a half kneeling cable press like Meg's here is doing. And then pair that with a core exercise, because you got to think on the front side of your pelvis, there's a tug of war going on, right? Your hip flexors pull down, your abdominals pull up. So if you want to level the pelvis out, shut off the hip flexors to pull the pelvis up, and then train the abdominals to pull the pelvis up and hold that position as well. So hopefully that makes sense. And then last but not least, We could do any half kneeling exercise, right? We don't have to just do this basic hip flexor stretch. Put somebody in half kneeling and then have them hinge on top of it, right? So let's say this half kneeling cable press, and then let's go work on a pull through. Let's go work on a trap bar deadlift. Let's work on bringing those hips through. So this is where it doesn't have to be like the old school corrective exercise. And Jay's probably laughing because I did a presentation back in the day on corrective exercise, but it doesn't have to be like that, right? It doesn't have to be just laying on your back and breathing. I mean, you can make it really sexy and really functional all at the same time to where your athletes and your clients feel like they're training. And that's such a key point. If they just feel like they're in like group PT, nobody wants that. They want to feel like they're training and they're getting better. So a couple notes here and ways that you can use this. In general, the way I set this up is something that pairs inhibition of the hip flexors with activation or loading of the hip extensors. So when you think about shutting off the front side, I'm thinking your hip flexor stretches, your half kneeling exercises, something to shut off the front side, and then combining that with either an abdominal exercise or a hip extension exercise to try and level that pelvis out and get it moving a little bit better. Another great piece about this, it can be used almost anywhere in the session. So there's times if you know, or if you're familiar with the R7 system, man, I'll use this as a reset, or in R3, my readiness. So I'll use it ramping up into a session. I'll use it mid-session to try and make sure somebody's moving a little bit better. Or I'll even use it at the end of the session to restore movement and make sure that when my client or my athlete walks out of the gym that they're feeling awesome. So now that we've covered inhibition to facilitation, next I want to talk about patterning supersets. And these are a really, really cool setup. It helps your clients and your athletes figure out movement strategies very, very quickly, especially some of those tricky movements like a squat or like a hinge. So why do we use patterning supersets? What do they bring to the table? And I think of patterning supersets as something that's going to help improve movement quality in a specific lift, exercise, or movement, right? And it'll make more sense here when I start to give you some examples. So here are some examples of how I set up a patterning superset, and I'll give you videos too because I know how important that is. So one of the exercises that I love, and if I can go back here, see if I can make this work. So patterning or a PVC squat. So all I'm doing here in this position is camping out and basically working on an isometric squat. And then I would pair that with an actual squatting variation, like a goblet squat, like a reaching squat, because I'm trying to teach that movement pattern. Another way you can do this, we've all done the wall tap hip hinge, right? We get an athlete close to the wall, we have them put their hands on their thighs, and we have them push their hips back. So they learn how to hinge with a neutral spine position. Well, let's take that, and let's take that understanding of where we want their spine, how to load their hamstrings, and now let's actually have them hinge afterwards. So it's pattern, load, and you're just doing that repeatedly to help them better understand the movement pattern. Another way to do this is putting them in a half kneeling position, because how many times have we seen an athlete when they split squat or lunge and they're like all over the place, their hips are rotating, their knees wobbling, their foot's all over. Put them in a half kneeling position first. Get them comfortable there. And then once they've dialed in that position, now let's stand them up and let's make the exercise a little bit more dynamic where they got to go up and down. So there's lots of cool ways you can set this up. So let me give you a couple practical examples here. So this is my girl, Taya. Taya is like 6'3". She's a phenomenal basketball player. She's playing in Greece right now. Should be in the WNBA, just for the record. But she really struggles to squat. Like a lot of our basketball players, really struggles to squat. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to give her this PVC squat. And this is a video, believe it or not, but she's reaching long. She's trying to sit down into a nice athletic position, and she's breathing into her back, right? Because if your back is very extended, like imagine a power lifter, and I'm going to kind of turn profile here, but imagine a power lifter where everything is closed off on the back side. They have to sit so far back, it's very hard for them to load their quads, to learn how to sit down. And this is imperative for basketball players. They have to learn how to sit down so they can play defense, so that they can move effectively side to side, and so they can improve their vertical jump. So we need to teach them how to squat down and up. So we do this patterning exercise to shut off that backside, and then we teach her to goblet squat. And after we put a little bit of a block underneath her, this looks even better. Now, keep in mind, when I started with Taya 2 years ago, she could not squat. I mean, literally everything, whether she liked it or not, was vertical tibia. She had to sit so far back. So this is a massive improvement for her. And it's showed up time and again because now she's a better defender. Now she's more athletic. She's quicker on her feet. So this is a great strategy. If you're working with athletes that struggle to squat or that are struggling to squat in a truly squatty pattern, right, where they sit down versus back, this is a great superset to help pattern the squat and make sure they're doing it more effectively. So a couple notes here, and this is kind of like a chicken or the egg thing because people will say, well, which exercise do you do first? And I think of it as if I want to pattern an exercise, I'm going to do the inhibition exercise first, right? So I'm going to pattern, load. Now, if you're just looking to restore motion, right? So let's say somebody squats pretty well, but over the course of a workout, they tend to kind of lose their position a little bit, or they tend to default back to old patterns. What I may do in that case is do the loading exercise first, and then pattern them with the second exercise to restore their motion. So as you can see, this is a really cool tool, a really cool superset that you can use that can help numerous clients and athletes. It just depends on how you structure it and how you set it up. Superset structure number 6, potentiation. And this is where things are starting to get fun. Because look, at the end of the day, we all want bigger, faster, stronger athletes, right? Like that's the name of the game. We want to increase force production. We want to increase power production. But how do we go about doing that? So when we talk about potentiation supersets, the way I think about this, and again, this is like 20 years of experience, right? When we got started, I think we were so focused on muscles, right? We got to build bigger muscles, and we never thought about the nervous system. We never thought about the impact that the nervous system had on our body and on performance. So now when I think about a potentiation superset, I think of this as a strategy to stimulate or desensitize the nervous system to improve force or power output. When you're first starting out lifting, the reason you can't lift that bar anymore is because your brain legitimately tells your body, I'm going to get hurt, and it shuts down. So the goal over time is to slowly and steadily increase the load and desensitize your nervous system so that when you put a really heavy weight on your back, it doesn't freak out. So here are a couple examples, and I got a ton of videos of this one because I think, number one, it's cool to watch, and number two, it's going to give you guys a lot of ideas. So we've got our old school, like do a squat and then pair it with a box jump. We've got a deadlift and we pair it with a broad jump. We could do a bench press and pair that with a supine med ball throw, so something explosive for the upper body. And I don't know about you, but I've found a ton of different ways that you can do this for the lower body, but I find you have to be a little bit more creative for the upper body because a lot of times people show off the lower body stuff, but there aren't nearly as many safe and effective ways to do this for the upper body. So you just got to be smart about it. You got to find and dig in to find a lot of different options. So here are a couple examples for you, and I'll mute this because you don't want to hear all the sounds, but here's my boy, Glenn Robinson. Now, look, Glenn touched 12.4 in college before I ever touched him. Like maxed out the Vertec, they had to stack it on top of boxes. So I'm not really trying to make this guy jump any higher. I'm just trying to stimulate his nervous system, give him enough of a boost so that he maintains that strength and that power, you know, throughout the off season. So here we're doing a trap bar deadlift. And I mean, this guy's pretty rock solid with his technique. So we bang out a set of 3 here. We take a minute or 2 rest, and then we go next door and we do a set of drop step box jumps. And I mean, look, that's crazy, right? That's a 36-inch box and he's not even working to get up there. So making it look very easy. So in this case, we got a hex bar deadlift that's a little bit more upright. Again, with my basketball players, I don't want to get on a soapbox about basketball, but I'm generally going to keep them a little bit more upright. And then he's going to pair that with a box jump. Now, let's talk about big boys. So this is fun. So that was Glenn, right? Here is his little brother, Jeelan. Jeelan is like 6'2", 300 pounds, playing in the XFL until they got shut down. But for Jeelan, he plays defensive line, defensive tackle, defensive end. So a very horizontal powered focused sport. So what we're doing here, we're going to bang out a set of trap bar deadlifts. Oh, sorry. Although that does sound cool. I mean, he's moving that bar at like 0.7, 0.8, like no problem. So we're going to train that. Yeah, 0.73 average. Yeah, 0.73, something like that. So that dude's moving that bar. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to bang out some tire flips. Getting the hips down and working on that horizontal power output. Again, beast mode. Dude's a savage. And then here's Jalen one other time. Now, with these bigger guys, like sometimes with basketball guys, I'll do like band resisted jumping variations. And I do band resisted because I'm cheap and don't have money for a Vertex, or a Vertimax. But with these bigger guys, what I don't want to do is slow them down, right? With these big guys, I want them to feel fast. I want them to feel explosive. So in this case, what we did with G, we used a band assisted squat, and then we paired it with a band assisted jump. So the big thing here, this is like right before he went to camp, like we want some pace behind this, right? I don't want it to be slow. I don't want him grinding. I made that mistake in the past where we're using too much weight. So banging out a good set there. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to jump. And he's, I mean, this guy's getting up. Like he can get on that 36-inch box pretty easy because of course they're brothers. So they got to have that sibling rivalry thing going on. So lots of ways you can set this up. But potentiation supersets are money. And if you're working with athletes, you may not need them when you're working with middle and high school age kids because they just need the development. They just need the training and the reps. But you get into college and elite level athletes, this is a nice way to stimulate some further progress. And it's just fun, right? They've been training for a while. Sometimes you just need to do things that are going to get a response, but they're also going to enjoy doing. So a couple notes here. Do you want to develop force or do you want to develop power? So if I'm chasing force, I'm going to go probably heavier on the main exercise. I'm going to do something that's probably a little bit slower, but still explosive for my contrast. Versus if I'm doing something for power, the bar speed's going to be fast. And I'm generally going to do something like band assisted or something that's going to allow them to move very, very quickly to jump up that power output. Another thing that I think is really important is keeping things vector specific. And what I mean by that is, you know, you have to look at the needs and the demands of your athlete, but basketball is very, very vertically dominant, right? Very vertical power dominant. So with my basketball guys, we're going to do a lot of stuff up and down. For a lot of my football guys, it's going to be more horizontal vector. So we're going to do a lot of trap bar variations, a lot of things like broad jumps, tire flips, things of that nature, because you have to have respect for the vectors that your athletes are going to play in. So think, does this guy need more vertical work or do they need more horizontal work? Sometimes it's lateral too. Last but not least, this may be the one that I'm most excited to talk about. And you guys can tell some of the early stuff, not as exciting. You've seen it before, but this stuff is where you can really make some inroads to helping your clients and athletes move better and become better, just better functioning humans overall. So let's talk about movement layering. And movement layering, at least in my opinion, is there to improve movement skill in athletic and or multi-directional movements. So a lot of times we're kind of getting out of the weight room and we're focusing more on movement patterns. It could be acceleration, it could be lateral acceleration, it could be change of direction, but we're using multiple exercises to layer in and teach our athletes how to move more efficiently. So if I can make this work, it's going to be impressive. So I got Kyrie Thomas here, and you're probably going to have to get the sound on that one. But what we have is a three-step approach here. So we've got a band hip turn, we've got a cone hip turn and shuffle, and we have a reactive hip turn. So all I'm trying to teach Kyrie here is, if you played basketball when 20 years ago, when I was growing up, they taught you to play defense by sliding, putting your foot on the ground, and then pivoting on your foot. And if you did that, and you didn't tear your ACL or your meniscus, if nothing else, it was just slow as hell trying to come out of that cut. So a far better way to do this is what Lee Taft describes as a hip turn. You open up your hips, you find an angle, and you aggressively attack the ground with your foot. So here is Kyrie layering this same concept or this same move throughout multiple exercises. So we start with this band hip turn, right? He's just going to hip turn, push, Very simple. Hip turn, push. He's just learning on opening the hips, finding an angle, and then pushing and going. Pretty easy, right? Then we're going to take that same exercise, and now we're going to turn it into a little bit more dynamic movement. All right, so now he's going to shuffle to the cone, hip turn and push. And then he's going to come back, hip turn, push. And then we're going to do it again. Slide, hip turn, push. So very isolated here. We're starting to integrate it a little bit more in this example, right? So we're integrating the pieces. And then finally, hopefully you guys can see this. I've got like the panel over here, but I'm standing right here and I'm going to make it a reactive exercise. So I'm going to point, Kyrie's going to hip turn, and he's going to get to the cone. He's going to square up. I'm going to point, hip turn, and go. You guys can see, I'll pause it so you can hear me. But you can see how we took this very basic exercise, we isolated it, we integrated it, and then we made it reactive. So we just built on this movement skill multiple times in one session. And this is really important because I only had Kyrie for a week. So I had to teach him a lot of stuff. I wanted to give him a lot of tools that he could go home and work on for the rest of the summer. Let's see if I can get all these. Okay, so here's another example, right? So here we're working on change of direction. So in this case, what I've got is, again, the Lee Taft smorgasbord here. I got a fake throw. I got a lateral jump and hold, which we've all done. And then we're going to make it truly reactive at the end. So the fake throw is cool because he's going to shuffle, and we're working on creating stiffness, stick. He slides and he sticks. And you can see Dakota here, when we first worked at this, he was struggling. He was all over the place. So let me show you this one more time. Shuffle, stick, stick. Finding those angles, being quick and sticking. From there, we're going to make it a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more explosive. And we've all done a lateral jump and hold, right? So in this case, Jay Sean is going to quick, stick, quick, stick. So we're working in that lateral vector, right? Training them to change directions and be more athletic when they're playing defense. And then we bring it all together and we make it reactive, we make it competitive so we get the most out of our athletes. So they've done these two exercises to try and build those patterns and layer in these movement skills. And then now they're just going at each other, right? And it's just quickness, change of direction, trying to shake your guy and get away from him. So hopefully that gives you guys some food for thought here. You don't have to take these exact examples, but these are some really cool ways that you can set up some supersets and layer in movements to create better movement skill. So a couple notes on doing this. And this is the way I set it up. You don't have to do it exactly like this, but I think it works really well. Your first exercise is generally there to set position or teach a foundational piece of the movement pattern. It's generally more isolated in nature. Maybe you're trying to help them find a certain position. Maybe you want them to feel a certain angle. So it's very low load, very low momentum. You're just trying to help them understand the positions first. The second piece layers in a controlled element of speed or momentum. So think about Kyrie. He learned that hip turn in the first exercise, and then we started to integrate it into a movement, but it was slow. It was controlled. It was rhythmic. We're just trying to help him better understand the positions that we want. And then if we really want to bring it together and we really truly want to help our athletes get faster, we have to make it reactive. We have to make it competitive. We have to add elements of speed and momentum control because that's how games are played. That's how possessions are won and lost. So you've got to allow them and afford them the opportunity to go head to head with a fellow athlete. And if you can do that, they're probably going to see really good results. In summary, supersets can help you in so many ways, whether it's saving time in your session, which is pretty much universally applicable. All of us are up against time constraints. Private sector, D1, high school, pro, we're all dealing with it. So if you're just using it to save time, that's a win. If you're just using it for the physiological benefits, whether it's building muscle, shedding body fat, getting a bigger pump, whatever, I'm cool with it. You can use that. It's going to help. But I think the real money and where we can really see some positive impact with our clients and with our athletes is using some of these neurology-based supersets where we're really working to clean up their movement patterns, to improve their force or power output and to help layer in proper movement skills so that they can be better athletes on the court. So with that being said, bottom line, find a way to use supersets in your programs to make them more effective. I think they're an incredibly powerful tool, something that we probably don't give enough respect to, or maybe something that we use very, very frequently, but without giving it a lot of thought. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Obviously, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. But again, I just truly appreciate you guys taking the time out 8, 9 o'clock on a Friday night to hang out with me. Hopefully you're enjoying a tasty beverage and got a thing or two out of the presentation.